Decades of conflict and violence in Iraq have led to major crises concerning refugees and internally displaced people. Today, Iraq is still plagued by instability, while economic growth remains slow and violence still plagues some parts of the country. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the population of concern, which includes internally displaced persons, refugees and returnees, stood at over 6 million last December. How big is the problem? Are they being sufficiently fed and clad? What's the international community doing to alleviate their suffering? I talked to Jean-Nicolas Beuze, representative of the UN Refugee Agency in Iraq. The humanitarian situation in Iraq seems to be very complex, with internally displaced people, persons, otherwise known as IDP, Iraqi refugees abroad and returnees, as well as foreign refugees, all of whom, as I said, are called population of concern. Can you help us understand which these specific groups are? And 20 years after the last major war in the country, what are their situation at this particular moment?
As you have mentioned, Iraq has been plagued by many conflicts and many forced displacement of people fleeing violence, their house being destroyed, family members being killed, unfortunately, women, children may be subjected to sexual violence, and so on and so forth. The last wave of displacement is actually related to Daesh, to this Islamic extremist group, which took from Mosul in the western part of the country, took large part of the territory between 2013 and 2017. It had displaced, as you see, more than 6 million Iraqi, but Daesh, this extremist group, was defeated with the coalition forces and the Iraqi forces in 2017. So since then, we have seen a gradual return of those populations, those who were displaced by this violence triggered by Daesh and triggered by the coalition response of defeating Daesh. Okay. 5 million have returned home already, but you have still 1 million who are living still today in displacement situation. On top of that, as you have really mentioned, it's important to remember that Iraq and the Kurdistan region of Iraq has received almost 300,000 Syrian and other refugees, because Iraq is geographically located in a place which is really troubled. You have Syria on the west, you have Iran on the east, you have Turkey on the northwest. And so you have population which may have been subjected to violence, conflict, discrimination, persecution, who found asylum in Iraq, despite the fact, as you mentioned, that Iraq is unstable, does not have such a strong economy, even if it's an oil-producing country, and is getting more and more fiscal space to be able to respond to the needs of all those displaced populations.
So you talk about fiscal difficulty, right? Give us an idea of exactly how big is that a burden, and how much difficulty is that putting on the local and the central governments on top of what they're experiencing as a slow economic, recovery.
So you mentioned the Iran-Iraq war, there was the fall of the Saddam regime, then the US invasion, then Daesh. So you can well imagine that the country has really poor infrastructure. They need to rebuild road, hospital, schools, which have been destroyed or not being maintained. And on top of that, you have those displaced population. The country is made of 41 million Iraqi. If you have 6 million, 5 million who are returned home, 1 million in displacement, another 300,000 Syrian refugees, it's a lot to take care of. That's why the United Nations and all the humanitarian partners and UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, have been giving assistance to those people, shelter, food, bringing back children to school, cash assistance for people not to fall under the poverty line. And now we are handing over this response to the authorities, because with the price of oil, the Iraqi authorities have regained fiscal space and have a much more balanced budget, and therefore can do the response themselves.
So over the past 5 years, or to your knowledge, if you can, over the past decade, how has the situation evolved? You were talking about the rise and fall of the
Daesh, but also the picking up of oil revenue for the Iraqi administration. So how has the refugee situation developed over the past few years, and how has the challenge for humanitarian agencies such as yours been able to carry out your work in that situation?
So at the fall of Daesh in 2017, you had 9 out of the 18 governorates of Iraq which were engulfed in violence, displacement, destruction. We had estimated at that point there were 11 million people in need of our assistance. 11 million people is 25% of the population. It's absolutely phenomenal. But with the progressive return to stability, security, people have returned home, tried to resume their life, and we have helped them to actually do that, rebuilding their shelter, trying to find livelihood opportunities for them, making sure children go to school or get vaccinated. So now we are really in a phase where the humanitarian assistance is less important than helping the government to develop the country from a development point of view, from a long-term point of view, re-establishing public services, including people in public social policies, but still taking care of extremely vulnerable people, women who have lost their husband, who are with children on their own, Syrian refugees who are considered as foreigners on the territory. It's not easy for those people to actually get their bread and butter.
So it seems like an enormous undertaking. And how would you describe the process? How smooth or how challenging it is? You're dealing with a volatile country that is still not gained its full independence, I would say, or sovereignty, and the infrastructure that had been destroyed, that is, that takes years and money to build. So how is the process of giving that kind of development opportunity back to the country of Iraq?
As you said, it's a very volatile situation, political instability, economic downturn due to the fact of COVID and the global economic crisis. Also remnant of Daesh groups, sleeping cells who sometimes commit atrocities. So it's a very complex operational environment. Having said that, if you turn around in the region and beyond, Iraq has the prospect to make it through, to go through this humanitarian response and advance a human rights, a rule of law, a development agenda. Bordered with Syria, which is still up in flame. Now we have the earthquake in Turkey and northwest Syria, which has destroyed livelihood and houses and killed so many people. Up north, you have Ukraine. Down south, you have Tigray and Ethiopia. You still have Afghanistan. You still have the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. So compared to those other crises throughout the world, and I'm not mentioning all the crises in Africa, for example, Iraq is on the path of recovery. It's a difficult process. It's a long process, but it's one where we can really see the light at the end of the tunnel and say we will be able to give hope, to give a possibility for people to resume a normal life in Iraq, continuing hosting Syrian refugees. But there is a prospect to get out of a humanitarian crisis, and that's very rare. That does not happen often.
What are the factors behind this possibility or this light of hope that I just mentioned?
Iraq has regained a lot of fiscal space. They make approximately $10 to $12 billion per month of all revenues. It's a lot of money that you can inject into your economy, that you can use to build hospitals, to rebuild roads, to build factories, and so on and so forth. So it's a unique situation. Many humanitarian crises in countries which do not have that kind of financial resources. The Iraqi people are extremely well educated, and therefore they can rebuild their countries by themselves.
You talk about Iraqis trying to bring control of their country or their sovereignty in their country into their own hands. In terms of that, do you see that is the reality already, or there are still hurdles to overcome? And in terms of cooperating with the Iraqis in rebuilding their country, is there a challenge? Are there hurdles for you?
Like anywhere in the world, money is not sufficient. It's also political will. It's political will to target the most vulnerable in societies, those who may have been discriminated, those who may have been stigmatized. We are speaking here, for example, about women on their own with children. There is social cultural norm, which means that women have more difficulties having access to job, having a place in society. We're speaking about persons with disabilities. We may be speaking about ethnic minorities, linguistic minorities, and so on and so forth. So the money is not sufficient, and that's why the United Nations is working with the authorities to make sure that in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals, you know, the goal for all the nations to really give a better living condition, better opportunities to all their population without discrimination. This is the challenge now of working with the authorities, getting this political will so that they do the right thing with this huge amount of money that they have, because it's a huge opportunity.
Is there this political will? And on top of the political will, is there the capacity, the government capability to do all of these things that are urgently, as you mentioned, urgently needed?
I believe, or rather I hope that there is a political will. I hope that the decision makers will look at their population, at those who are the most vulnerable, and will decide to do the right thing. But it's complicated because it's a mosaic of tribes, it's a mosaic of religion. You have Sunni minority with a Shia majority. The government is mainly composed of Shia representatives. You have the Kurds in the north, which are in a kind of a semi-autonomous region, the Kurdistan region of Iraq. So it's complicated. But I think that everybody sees the writing on the wall. If they don't use this opportunity now, they may go back to the decades of violence that you were mentioning before, and that nobody wants.
In terms of efforts on the part of the international community, where do you feel must be stepped up, the contribution or the attention, or I don't know, resources? What would you say on this part?
I like the fact that you mentioned attention. I think we need to keep Iraq on the radar screen of the international community of big countries such as China, to make sure that we help them follow this path towards recovery, that we support them with technical advice. China is very key here in this country for reconstruction. They have helped with schools in the country. Education is important for China and for Iraq. So it's important that we keep this attention, because the world leaders are constantly shifting their priorities. One day it's Ukraine, the other day it's Afghanistan. And we tend to forget those protracted crises like Iraq, which get less attention, less media attention. And that's why we need really to further the support that we give, technical support, political support to the Iraqi authorities and the Kurdish authorities to do the right thing.
Thank you very much, Jean-Nicolas Beuze, representative of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, joining us from Baghdad, Iraq. We'll keep a close eye on the development of the situation. Thank you once again.
Jean-Nicolas Beuze, representative of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Iraq. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got the point.